The courtroom was silent except for the sound of a gavel striking wood. A teenage boy stood alone at the defense table, wearing a plain shirt and jeans. His hands were steady, his eyes calm. Across from him sat a judge known for his sarcasm and sharp tongue. Moments earlier, that judge had openly mocked the boy, called him out of his depth, a kid playing dress-up, and someone who clearly didn't belong here. But what no one in that room knew was that this boy wasn't just here to defend himself. He was about to expose a truth so shocking, so undeniable, that it would leave the judge speechless and change everything. His name was Jalen Carter, 17 years old, high school senior, top of his class. On paper, he was a model student. But that didn't stop the police from pulling him off the street one afternoon and accusing him of a robbery he didn't commit. It happened fast. A convenience store had been robbed, and the suspect was described as a young black male in a hoodie. Jalen fit the vague description, at least in the eyes of the officers. They didn't ask where he'd been or check the surveillance footage before arresting him. The truth was, at the time of the robbery, Jalen was in the public library working on a scholarship application. But when he tried to explain, the officers brushed him off. He was booked, fingerprinted, and told he'd be assigned a public defender. At first, Jalen's mother tried to find a lawyer, but their family didn't have the money. That's when Jalen made a decision that shocked everyone. He would represent himself. It wasn't just stubbornness. Jalen had spent years reading law books in the library, fascinated by the way cases were won and lost. Now, with his own freedom on the line, that knowledge was his only weapon. When the judge saw him walk into court alone, carrying nothing but a folder of notes, he smirked. To him, this was a waste of time. But for Jalen, it was the fight of his life. From the first day of the trial, the odds were stacked against Jalen. The prosecutor painted him as a reckless kid who fit the profile of the robber. The store clerk testified, claiming she recognized him, even though she had only seen the robber for a few seconds. Jalen didn't react with anger. Instead, he listened, really listened, to every word, jotting down details in neat handwriting. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't raise his voice. He simply asked careful, precise questions that exposed cracks in the testimony. To the store clerk, he asked about the lighting in the store, the distance from the counter to the door, and the speed at which the robber left. Slowly, her certainty began to fade. He pointed out that the police report had inconsistencies. The time of the robbery didn't match the timeline the prosecution gave. He showed that the initial description mentioned facial hair, but he had none. On the second day, Jalen presented his alibi. He had been logged into a library computer at the exact time of the robbery. The librarian confirmed this under oath. Still, the judge seemed unconvinced, as if Jalen's words carried less weight because of his age. The tension in the room grew. The prosecutor tried to rattle him, calling his approach childish and naive. But Jalen didn't flinch. Every question, every piece of evidence he presented chipped away at the case against him. Behind the scenes, Jalen was working tirelessly. After court each day, he went back to the library to research legal precedents. He studied case law late, into the night, learning how to make his arguments airtight. People in the courtroom began to notice. Even those who doubted him at first leaned forward when he spoke. The boy who was mocked for daring to defend himself was now commanding the room, and yet he had one final piece of evidence, a single document, that could end the trial. Instantly, he was saving it for the perfect moment. On the third morning of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the teenager who was dismantling the prosecution's case. Some people came out of curiosity. Others came because they didn't believe it was possible. Jalen stood at the front, holding a single folder. Inside was the final piece of evidence, something he had fought hard to get. He began by calmly reviewing the facts one last time. The wrong description, the conflicting witness statements, the library logs. Each point landed like a hammer. Then he took a deep breath and pulled out a printed email. It was from the store's own security company. The time-stamped footage clearly showed the robber's face, and it wasn't Jalen. The man in the video was at least 10 years older, with a completely different build. The courtroom shifted into a stunned silence. Jalen walked the printed images up to the judge's bench. Judge Grayson stared at them for a long moment, his expression hard to read. The prosecutor tried to object, claiming the footage was inconclusive, but Jalen was ready. He produced a sworn statement from a forensic video analyst confirming the man in the footage could not be him. Every doubt, every smirk, every condescending glance he had endured over the past days suddenly had no ground to stand on. Judge Grayson looked up at Jalen, and for the first time, there was no trace of mockery. "The court finds the defendant not guilty," he said slowly. The gavel hit the desk. Gasps filled the room. Some people applauded quietly. The prosecutor sank back into his chair, avoiding eye contact. Jalen didn't smile. He simply gathered his papers, nodded politely, and walked out of the courtroom. He had proven his innocence, but more than that, he had proven something far bigger, that brilliance, determination, and truth could shatter even the deepest prejudice. Outside the courthouse, Jalen's mother rushed to him, tears streaming down her face. She hugged him tightly, holding on as if she never wanted to let go. Strangers who had watched the trial approached, some shaking his hand, others simply offering a quiet nod of respect. The story of the teenager who beat the system spread quickly. Social media lit up with clips from the trial, each one showing Jalen's calm focus as he dismantled the case against him. For some, it was an inspiring example of courage. For others, it was a painful reminder of how close an innocent person could come to losing everything because of prejudice. Jalen didn't celebrate in the way people expected. There was no victory speech, no triumphant smile. Instead, he went back to the same library where it had all begun. He walked past the rows of books, stopping at the law section. His hand rested on a worn textbook. In that quiet moment, he made a promise to himself. This wouldn't be the last time he stood in a courtroom. But next time, it would be to defend someone else. The truth was, his case had been an exception. Many others didn't have the resources, confidence, or knowledge to fight back. They didn't have hours to study or a mother who understood the law. They didn't have a second chance. Jalen knew the system wasn't fixed just because one young man had walked free. It was still heavy, still unfair, and still tilted against people like him. But he also knew that change starts with people who refuse to be silent. The question lingered. How many innocent lives are lost to prejudice before the world decides enough is enough? And maybe, just maybe, his story would make someone else stand up. Not just for themselves, but for justice.